It is probably worth mentioning as we go through these slides and we go through the discussions that we brought to our conversation this morning, whether it be financial discussions, whether it be AVL discussions, or partners like Lionheart. BGW shares no financial connection whatsoever to any of these organizations. We don't take kickback fees, we don't take referral fees, they don't take them from us. We have put their names forward because we found them to be consistent with a stewardship-driven approach. In my career, I've watched financial organizations and AVL companies prey on churches. It has been abusive in some situations. And we have latched onto these organizations because they were organizations that came in, acted with a measure of integrity, and brought a value that we were not seeing in other sectors of the marketplace. And so that's why we do what we do, is we're looking for partners who will join us in a stewardship-driven approach. But there is no sharing of financial information or anything else. I don't think I've ever even gotten a dinner out of the deal, to be honest with you. So we love Lionheart. Lionheart is an organization that makes a lot of sense to us. They are a not-for-profit. I don't know if you caught that chart that he had up there. It was in little text that I just caught for the first time today, but they also bring about $500,000 of FF&E to the table, fixtures, furnishings, and equipment to equip their rooms with all the stuff that is needed for an operating pre-K at that level. And so they bring that to the table as well and don't ask the church. We were involved with an organization out of Detroit, LCG, Learning Care Group, that had 1,000 different locations. Lionheart has 18. Learning Care Group is a much more sophisticated organization operating under 7 different brands. But from a financial standpoint to the ministry, they weren't anywhere close, and their hiring practices got in the way because they were a for-profit company. So we have gone the direction of Lionheart in order to get that to where it needs to be for a ministry to work alongside them in a consistent manner to who they are as representatives of the gospel. Okay, so we're going to jump into our last segment here, and a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about in this last segment are things that caused me to change my career path 20 years into my career. Some things that I saw. I've already confessed to you that I come from a background of design. I'm an architect's architect. I chaired the American Institute of Architects for several years in the state of Utah. I represented architects in our regional zone. I bought into the party line of portfolio-driven perspective. I had awards hanging on my wall. I had all kinds of design stuff. I changed that path 20 years ago for a lot of the things that are in this next part of the presentation. And I do want to spend a little bit of time on this so that you can understand what some of the advantages and disadvantages are of different methods of putting a contract together with an organization, okay? We talked a little bit about this on the phone last week, Jimmy. So some of this you're going to find a little bit redundant, but I hope that it becomes more clear. First of all, we start with the process that the world's way of getting buildings built is a broken process. It's just like democracy. I mean, what a week to talk about democracy. What a crazy week. Democracy is the system that we've all pretty much selected to go with, or your notion of what a republic is, because we don't live under God's authority yet, right? That's going to be the ideal. We'll get there someday. Some of us sooner than others. But when we finally realize what a benevolent God we have and that who's under the authority under who we would operate will be so much better than democracy. But we're going to talk a little bit about what leads to this. First of all, this statement comes out of the National Building Institute that says 78% of commercial projects are over budget. That number used to be like 71%. Now it's 78% of commercial projects are over budget. That's 80%. That's 4 out of 5 projects are over time, right? Over budget. Projects are 70 days late on average, and lateness equates to cost. You know, projects these days, because the subs are spread so thin that you'll have a schedule on a project that'll say that the sheetrock ought to take 6 weeks. Well, that 6 weeks is assuming that you're going to have 10 sheetrockers show up to work. When you only get 4, because they're spread so thin, that 6 weeks turns into 12 weeks. And 12 weeks is going to play havoc in the ramifications to the critical path as the project goes on down the path. And that happens in all these skilled trades, whether it be concrete or site work, preparing the slabs, preparing the site, or whether it be HVAC. All these skilled trades are spread thin. And so it's a process where I've seen in the last few years. I remember about in the year 2020, in our Florida builder, Collage Construction, Lee Corcoran, a man who I've really come to love and respect over the years. Lee was working on a project, and he said, well, we're going to need about 12 months for this project. And I said, Lee, this is a small project. This is a 7-month project. You know it, and I know it. I said, why are you dragging your feet on this? And by the way, you're charging for this. And he said, I can't help it. He said, I can't get the subs to show up to the job. I can't get them there. We ended up having to break some of those subcontractors into 2 contracts to be able to try to get their work done on time in order to bring the time down. It's a hard market out there, and Central Texas is right in the middle of it. It's right in the middle of it. So it's a broken process, and it was beforehand. Not just broken from the things that have been happening lately, but oftentimes the acrimony that goes on between architects and contractors is legendary. The job site battles that go on, the infighting, the finger pointing that goes on. We're dealing with a little water drip coming in through one of these water penetrations, duct penetrations in the back of the room here. And Steve and I were commiserating with Pastor Wade before we started this morning, and Steve made the comment, the problem is you got the subs doing this right now. Okay, well, we're going to have to unify and figure out how to get this leak stopped. That's the way it's going to be. But that's endemic to our process, is people wanting to place the blame on somebody else. How do we get around that? How can we build trust, relationships, create a spirit of communication, and use that approach towards reducing cost? How does that happen? And so this concept of building relationship and the way that we go about this is what I saw 20 years ago. I got invited to come up to the BGW office 2 years into its formation. I was operating my own office. I got a phone call from Dan, who later became my partner, to go up and see BGW. I decided I did not want to go because I didn't want to go see a company who had named their company Building God's Way. Why would you name your company Building God's Way? What a dumb name. And so I put it off. He called me and said, can you come up and see what we're doing? I said, yeah. I gave him the answer that everybody gives when they don't want to do something and they know. This is the universal cross cultures. You just tell them 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, 90% of the time, they'll forget they ever invited you in the first place. So I gave him the 2-week answer. Yeah, I can come up in about 2 weeks. My schedule should free up. Well, 2 weeks later, I get a phone call. Hey, we were going to get together this week. Oh, yeah, that's right. So I gave him the 2-week deal again. I did the 2-week deal for 6 weeks. And finally ended up realizing he's not going to quit calling. I better just go up there. It's like a 30-mile drive, which is, to a person who's busy, that's just a terrible waste of time. But I got in the car. I drove up there. I planned on spending 45 minutes up there. I ended up spending 6 hours up there and seeing a situation that was very different than what I was used to. First of all, I met a couple of contractors who were partner contracts to BGW at the time, Kurt Hilbers and from Hilbers Construction, Northern California, and Ron Hargett out of Central Kentucky. And they were up there going through some training with Dan, and I was actually getting the idea that they were friends. And I'm thinking, okay, you got a contractor in the enemy's office or vice versa. What's going on here? How come these contractors and architects are commiserating? So I attributed it to being a design-build relationship. So let me talk about those kinds of relationships. First of all, there's 2 primary methods of getting work done today. One of them is called design, bid, build. You go out, you hire an architect, you sign a contract with the architect, you go through a process with the architect to get the building built, you rely on the architect to get estimates done, or they do their own estimate in-house. And somewhere along the line, after the zoning's approved, after the schematics are done, after the money's raised, after the permit drawings are done, they're put out to bid to multiple general contractors, right? Capitalism. Some of us still like capitalism. Not everybody, but some of us think capitalism works actually pretty good. So you put it out there, and what are you relying on at that point? You're relying on the competitive nature of the project for those general contractors to seek out the hungriest array of subs that they can find in the marketplace. So they're going to go out and they're going to put those drawings in the hands of as many HVAC, as many electrical, steel, concrete, and say, can you look at the scope that's defined in these drawings and give us a bid? And at the end of that bid period, typically 2 to 4 weeks, you get their bids back in at a certain point during the day. Everybody puts their bid tabulations together, putting the array of those subs that they want to use, and then they submit that to the architect and the owner for them to review to determine which one they're going to hire. Okay? Not a bad process. The problem with the process, I should say the benefit of the process is competition. We like competition. We like sharpening our pencils. We like good bids, right? That's good. I'm trying to get a new furnace put in a house. I went out and got 6 bids. They range anywhere from $4,200 to $9,800 for essentially the same unit to be put in. Somebody's not very hungry. Somebody's maybe a little too hungry. What are they going to skimp on? What are you doing that they're not doing? So I've got to sort that out. I like the process. The problem with the process is that everybody holds their cards close to their vest. When I started asking hard questions of the $4,200 person, they said, no, we're not going to put it on a pedestal. Well, what does a pedestal cost? Because I need to bring some air in from underneath, right? Well, you probably should do that. Well, how much does that cost? Well, that's another $400. Okay. Does it include the power hookups? No, we didn't have the power hookups in there. We isolated that on our bid form. Did you see that? No, I didn't see that. I was going to catch that later the hard way, right? Okay. So oftentimes, everybody holds their cards close to their vest in information that could be asked in order to refine that bid to make sure that you're getting everything you want is sometimes held in reserve, and then it's sprung upon you during the course of construction. Oh, you wanted color in that wall. No, yeah, well, if you're going to want color, we're going to charge you extra for color on that paint. Okay, well, so sometimes information is not forthcoming, and everybody holds their cards close to their vest. Why? Because they're under competition, right? I don't blame them. I mean, if I was a subcontractor, I would give them the necessary bid that I think, but if I find a flaw in the bid documents, I will probably hold my cards close to the vest, and then later we'll talk about it at a time when I'm not under competition, and maybe I can get a change order out of it. That's where the battles come in, is the change orders. I've had some legendary conversations on change orders, unbelievable requests. I did a stadium project one time. When Craig was doing sports planning work, we were doing a stadium project, 7 stories tall, and I'll never forget that they had not put levels 3 and 4 into the package to start with because they didn't have enough money. They found some money. I put together an estimate. I knew that the estimate was about $250,000. The change order that came back was $750,000. It was asked for during the course of construction. Well, we had to discuss that. It was a battle in the job trailer about what value was. I said, okay, here's my estimate. You're $500,000. You're 3 times my estimate. What are you trying to do here? Well, that was a bad statement. That was an accusatory statement. What they were trying to do is they were trying to maximize their profit, right? That's what they're trying to do. And I didn't need to shame them for doing that. But we did have to get to a real value, and the battle started. So a lot of times in design, bid, build, the other danger of design, bid, build is that you're relying upon an architect to put together estimates, and architects are not very good estimators. Contractors are more tuned in to what's going on in the current marketplace than architects are. So, oftentimes, surprises can happen at bid time. I was in Raleigh giving one of these seminars, and somebody raised their hand and said, our project was estimated at 1.6. Our bid came in at 6.4. How does that happen? I'll tell you how that happens. It happens by somebody burying their head in the sand and not counting the cost. So, what do we do about those things? Well, back in the 80s, late 80s, public sector clients got tired of the acrimony that was going on, and they got tired of the litigation that was going on. So, a lot of public sector clients resorted to design build, where an architect and a contractor would pair under one contract. What's the advantage of that? No fighting. None of this. You go in the back room and work it out, right? That's a good thing. The problem with design build is oftentimes the bid is a stilted bid. It's not a real bid. And so I would suggest that they would go out and get bids, but the bids will be to the 3 or 4 favorite subcontractors that they like to work with, that offer them the biggest guarantee of safety, not necessarily the hungriest of the subs that are in the marketplace. Okay, so the bid process in a design build can sometimes be stilted. It's not an accurate bid. It's not a representation of a saturated market, right? In a design-build relationship, the architect does not work for the owner. The architect works, primarily for the state in which they're licensed, that the project is occurring, health, safety, welfare. Health, safety, welfare is my first, as a licensed architect in the state of Texas, if somebody came to me and said, hey, we don't want to use the 14-inch joists up there, we think we can do that in 12. It'll be a little bouncier, but I think it'll be okay. I cannot sacrifice health, safety, welfare under the threat of my license. That's my first obligation. But when it comes to matters of cost, if a contractor wants to charge $750,000 for a $250,000 change order, I have nothing to say about it. I am out of that conversation because I don't work for the owner to represent them. I work for the general contractor. I am working for them. One contract, okay? So I don't need to speak up. And I've had owners say, what do you think about that? And I have politely, physically taken a step backward and said, I'm not in the conversation to talk cost to you. That's between you and the contractor. So sometimes owners can feel a little vulnerable in that situation. Okay? So there are some advantages to design build, though. You don't have a lot of litigation. You don't have a lot of fighting going on between architects and contractors or subcontractors. So what do we do to find the balance between these two things? We're going to propose something here that the perspective of the architect and the contractor need to change. That the architect has to stop thinking about themselves as the sole trusted advisor to an owner. That we're there to protect the owner from the contractor. And the contractor has to stop thinking advantageously towards the budget. So the architect and the contractor can both treat each other as respected, trusted advisors to a project. That's a good thing when they are working in cooperation, but not under the same contract. Point, counterpoint. You know, a balance check. That's an important thing. And with whom, the owner, the contractor, and the architect, we agree to put the Lord in the center of the relationship. That's a big one, because that implies that there's going to be things along the way that are going to be difficult matters that we have to step up to and not go running for the hills on and not hide our heads in the sand on. So that implies a certain level of integrity when we're going to introduce the relationship that we enjoy together as Christians under the authority of a God. Okay? This is something that was referred to, I think Jonathan asked about this in the last, do we count the soft costs? And Steve piped up from the back row over there and said, yes, we do. So things like design fees, fundraising, communication, inspection fees, AVL costs, FF&E costs, interest costs are all counted. And you can see in this example, this pie chart varies from project to project. Sometimes that big green swath there of site and building costs is 3/4 of the total amount. Sometimes it's half the total amount. We've seen FF&E costs get out of control. Cost of land sometimes is out of control. So that can vary quite a bit from project to project. But if you go to somebody and you say, well, what does your project cost? It's like going into a car dealership, as I explained to you, Jimmy, and going and saying, well, how much is a car? Okay, let's talk. What are you talking about for that car? You talking about the cost of the car as it comes off the production line, or are you talking about the car as it's delivered with all the taxes applied to it, all the horns and whistles you want on that car? Those two numbers can be completely isolated from one another. So you have to even know how to ask the question right. Sometimes people just ask the question in too general of a way, and they get the answer that sometimes they didn't understand until much later, and it leads them down the wrong situation. The outer blue circle is what oftentimes happens is you get that initial price and you're fixed in on a guaranteed maximum price, but there's this change order creep that starts to happen over time, and that green circle grows and grows to the blue circle size. And that amount of margin around the outside is a surprisingly large amount of money that can be added to a project. How do you avoid that? How do you avoid change orders? Can you avoid change orders? Yes, you can, by the way. You can say, I don't want any change orders on this project. And they'll say, okay, well, here's your price. No change orders. You may not like the price, though, because they're gonna put something in there to cover themselves for the things that sometimes don't go perfectly on a project. Okay, but we're going to talk about other ways to avoid change orders. We call it pre-construction stewardship. And pre-construction stewardship to us is happening concurrently while the city is reviewing the drawings. So we've gone through the zoning approval, we've started the permit drawings, we've finished the permit drawings. That's where we've taken 4 or 5 schematic sheets and turned it into 60 or 80 architectural, structural, mechanical, electrical, civil. All those drawings are completed. All of them are integrated with one another, and they're ready for the bid. So while they go in for the permit, they're into the city, we go through this process. And in our process, our bid process, takes us about 6 weeks, 8 weeks to go through. Sometimes longer, right, Steve? Depends on the project, depends on the budget, depends on what we're trying to get to. But the idea here is that we are utilizing an untapped resource in order to find value for projects, and that is the subcontracting community. So the second bullet item on here is seeking wisdom from subcontractors prior to the final completion of drawings. We have something labeled 100% complete. We put it in the hands of the subs, but before we do, we have a meeting with them. We will have a 1-hour session, and in that 1-hour session, we just finished one over in Alabama the other day. This was a 50,000 square foot building, $16 million project. We had 70 subcontractors show up to the meeting. Why? Because they put on a really good lunch. People will show up for food. Make it good, advertise it, and invite them in for a really good meal. And when they come in, we're basically sharing 3 things in 1 hour time. The first thing is we want somebody from the ministry group to stand up and tell them who you are, why you're doing the project. So 5 minutes or less, tell them a little bit about yourself and a little history, a couple of sentences about that, a little bit about your constituency and what benefit this project is bringing to that community and to the surrounding community. And then back away from the podium. Turn it back over to the general contractor and let the general contractor explain the project to them. We will show them the drawings. We will show them the detailed drawings. We will go through the pages. We will talk about the systems in the project. We'll talk about the budget. We will show them the budget. It doesn't matter that you show them the budget. They're not going to base their bid based on you showing them the budget. They're going to base their bid based on what? How busy I am and who else is in the room that I'm competing with, right? So we share the budget with them. Why? Because we're trying to get them onto the same side of the fence as us and tell them in our communications, you are not the adversary. Okay? Then we will talk about where the money's coming from. Generis did our capital campaign. It proved to be successful in the following way. And CFS is doing our money on this project. We're all set up. We can start construction in 4 weeks. Why are we telling them that? They want to know, are you real? Are you real? Have you counted the cost? If they look at your budget and say, they're trying to get this thing done for $135 a square foot, are they living in 2010? Those kind of projects don't happen anymore. They're out of there. They'll enjoy the lunch, they'll thank you, and they're gone. But if they know you've counted the cost, and they know that you have real dollars committed to the project, and that you have financial wherewithal to be able to start the project, today they're more likely to give you a bid. And today, it's tough to get bids. We want to get bids, right? We want to give them a free lunch, but at the same time, we want to bid, right? So we'll go through that process. It gives us an opportunity to talk about in-kind stuff. We'll talk about in-kind giving. What does that look like? We have a whole regimen for how to talk about in-kind giving. We'll tell them this. We'll say, we want you to make money on this project. You know what the reaction is? Sure you do. I got an architect telling me they want us to make money. Yeah, we want you to make money. Tell us the circumstances that we can establish on this project for you to become an efficient bidder. And they'll tell you, the HVAC ductwork guys will say, don't let the fire sprinkler guy get there ahead of me. Let me do my ductwork first. And they'll leave the room and the fire sprinkler people will show up and say, don't let those ductwork guys get to the job site ahead of me. Right? They're competing for the same lens in the building. Okay, so, all right. Fire sprinkler guys, HVAC guys, come back in the room together. Let's talk. And there may be 4 HVAC people or companies. There may be 3 companies doing fire sprinklers. But we got to talk about where the conflict points are so that you can offer a bid that you don't feel like you're going to get buried under because you showed up 2 days late to the project. So we start to strategize about what we would call lean construction. These are topics that are happening. Nobody's asked them for a price yet. There's no bidding going on yet. All we're doing is talking about the way to put the building together and hearing their ideas. We will say to them that day, we know that you know more about your trade than we do as architects about your trade. And I can tell you 99% of them in the room have never heard an architect say that to them. Architects don't say that to subs. Why? A, they don't want to say what's true. They come out of architectural school, they know virtually nothing about construction, and the subs start humiliating them from their first day of their career on a job site. And so when you say to a subcontractor, look, I know that the thing is up. You're an HVAC guy, you know more about sheet metal and putting in sheet metal than I am ever going to know or my engineer's going to know. Would you look at these drawings, and if this was your building, how would you do it? They're never asked their opinion. They are the missing ingredient. They are job performers, not scope definers. And what we're saying is, you have wisdom. Would you bring your wisdom to bear in this project? Would you be willing to do that? Would you take our drawings and come back and work with us 2 weeks and go through this set of drawings? And they'll come back and they'll do 2 things. They will find all the stupid things you did in your set of drawings that are conflicts. You're trying to put up, do I see any of them up there? Well, sometimes you'll see ducts that are going through the webs of the joist, and you'll have somebody say, yeah, you're trying to put a 26-inch duct through a 30-inch joist. Well, yeah, well, there's 4 inches left over. Yeah, but by the time you count the triangle and the depth of the angles on the top and the bottom, you're not going to put a 22-inch duct through that. And that happens more frequently, and then all of a sudden you're dealing with a change order to either change the nature of the duct, send that piece of duct back, and the changes get crazy. So now all of a sudden you're on the job with delay trying to deal with these kinds of issues. So they'll come back and they'll find that stuff for you and bring those ideas to bear. And they'll bring up new ways of getting things done. Have you tried using Lindab ductwork instead of this kind of ductwork? I mean, we've learned some amazing things from subcontractors. I'll give an example of the Lindab stuff in just a minute. We also have a factory direct purchasing side. You can use it or not use it. You can use PTG, use them or not use them. You can use Generis, use them or not use them. All we're suggesting is this is a more cost-efficient way to get it done. If you don't have a better way to do it, we'd like to go this direction because we can afford it better for your project. We don't deal with commodities. Concrete, steel, rebar, sheetrock, all those are commodities that are purchased and negotiated locally. But this kind of stuff is all built out of the city, typically, and brought in. And those are the kind of things that we can bring some national purchasing help on. We'll talk about life cycle costing. This opportunity to sit across the table with a group of subs to talk about life cycle costing is huge. This is a good example of life cycle costing. This is Lindab ductwork. You see those two little black bands that are on that duct? Those are joining bands there. Those are made out of neoprene. We learned about this from a subcontractor. In the past, they would bring in spiral duct like this. They would join it together. And in the old days, they used to put duct tape. That's what duct tape was. Nobody uses duct tape. I think the only thing they use duct tape now is to make prom dresses and things like that. But in the old days, they used to use duct tape. Now they use these plasticizing agents, or they use tape that's kind of an aluminized tape that goes around the outside. Well, what ends up happening on all those kinds of joining methods is over time, those joining materials become brittle up in the higher temperatures of an interstitial area above a ceiling line. It may be 70 degrees down here. Up in a room, it may be 130 degrees on a summer afternoon in Houston. So that becomes brittle, and what happens is those joints begin to fail and the air starts to leak, and you can lose anywhere from 15 to 25% of your static pressure into your interstitial space. So you're not getting the direct benefit of the cool air in the space itself. Now that does help a little bit because you're cooling the bigger volume, but it's inefficient. Well, we learned about this Lindab ductwork joining method made out of neoprene that does not degrade over time. Neoprene doesn't degrade in 130 degree heat. And it joins much faster. So they'll tell you, you're going to pay about 40% more for these joints than you are for another kind of joining method. So we're going to pay more for this. Yeah, but it goes in half the time. The joining method is much faster. We learned that from a sub. And when you can get one sub saying that in a meeting with another sub, listening to that, it's like, oh, okay, I better figure out what's going on. Well, now this has become some known part of the marketplace. When we first heard these things from subcontractors, nobody knew what Lindab ductwork. Now there's 4 or 5 competitors out there to Lindab, and it's a much more accepted way, and people have figured out. I sat at Northlands Church over in Orlando one day and watched 2 guys put together a 40-foot trunk duct with branches going off in 6 different directions and assemble this thing on the ground using that joining method, and on 2 ladders, lift it up and clip it in less than 10 minutes. It was incredible. It's like, okay, I see what you're talking about now. I see how fast it goes in. And this all came from subs, not from an engineer who knows about HVAC, from a sub who knows about putting in HVAC stuff. So really important things to have. And all of this leads, by the way, to the ministry of construction. I said early on, BGW is all about stewardship and ministry. Dan, my old partner, who's retired now, had a heart to bring the gospel to the construction community. And at the time that I went up to visit Dan in his office before I became his partner, I was in an office. I had 25 architects working for me. I'm not sure any of those architects, maybe 1 or 2, even knew I was a believer in Christ. I had managed to segregate my life in Christ from my working life. And suddenly I'm seeing a vision for how to utilize the tools and the gifts of design to reach people for Christ, and not treat the contractor like the enemy, but to treat the contractor like the advocate or somebody who can come into the project. If you're going to go to war with them to get the best possible price, you can't minister to them. It's inconsistent. But if you go to them and ask them for their favor, ask them for their thoughts the way that Nehemiah did, you have a much better chance of coming to a relationship that is a relationship that can lead to a ministerial type relationship. So all of the churches and the organizations that we work with, we have a ministry program that's set forward.
When BGW said that one of the hopes that they had in partnering with organizations like us is that not only are we trying to reach people in our community, but also we have a ministry opportunity to try to reach the contractors and every person who walks on the job site. That really made us excited because we too have that same mission in mind. And so we really were very intentional about the ministry through the construction process. And we found it was a real way to engage the whole church, to be a part of the process. And so we created some teams, and every single day during the construction process, we provided drinks and snacks and food. You know, it's Florida, it's hot. And so for them to have a cold Gatorade or water and to come over and have an area, picnic tables in the shade where we can thank them and appreciate them and encourage them for what they did, that really just made it a very unique experience that I think most of these subcontractors had never experienced before. They were constantly thanking us and appreciating us for serving them. It also gave us a great avenue to, build a relationship with them. We have seen some fruit from that as well. We have a particular story where during the process, we had a contractor who was awarded a bid. He was going through a really difficult time in his life, and one Sunday, he actually showed up at Crosspoint and revealed that he was just going through a really difficult time, and ultimately he rededicated his life to Christ. He's been coming to Crosspoint ever since. He's in fact in my small group that meets every week, and I would never have met him, and God used Crosspoint's building project to bring him back to God. And what an incredible testimony and story.
That they had 154 mile-an-hour winds, 1 mile an hour short of Category 5 at the building, and lost a couple of gutter downspouts in the process, but other than that, they came through that storm okay. So I was glad to hear that. Not all of their people, though, survived that. They did have some people whose homes were swept away, and had some issues going on with some of the individual members, but they've rallied around them too. Okay, there are stories I could sit up here and tell about the ministry of construction, and the reason that we do the ministry of construction is because it is who we are as the light of Christ, right? That's what we do because we are the light of Christ. Some of the things that happen, some of the dynamics of that, though, are that they will come up and they will thank you. They will also give back to you in ways that you had not anticipated. They will come, they're more ready with ideas, so on and so forth. We had a masonry contractor in Kentucky come to us and say, boy, you're using these seismic clips on your brick here in northern Kentucky. These are clips that hold the brick to the substrate, the veneer brick to the substrate. We said, yeah, well, okay, what's the problem? We're in the New Madrid fault zone. He said, no, you're not in the New Madrid fault zone. You're about 30 miles outside the New Madrid fault zone. We don't need to do it. Okay, well, that's good. So we save some money? Yep. So instead of $3 a clip, they're $1.25 a clip. So we save $1.75? Yeah. Okay, great. How many you got? 30,000 of them. Okay, that's a meaningful discussion that came from an individual who was plugged into the relationship side of what was going on. He could have easily suggested the change to the code official and pocketed the money, but he didn't because he was in on the relationship side. He was on the team. That's the sort of teaming that we're talking about trying to establish with a group of subs so that they are not thinking solely for themselves, but thinking outside for the ministry.